right.
2 days after Thanksgiving. It's 2018. We're here in Lake Tahoe with Lily, Diego, Camille, Adrian, Jasmin, Leslie, Toshi, Liza, and Joel. Here's what we look like. Hi. Hi. Okay. So, we just wanted to take this opportunity. You know, it's about to be your 70th birthday, Dad. We want to just kind of ask you some questions, get it on tape for posterity, have the kids be able to look at it later if they want to, right? Maybe we'll just start kind of like where you were born and kind of maybe list off some of the places you lived.
Well, I mean, the history is, first of all, little grandma was born and raised in Saginaw, Michigan, which is upstate, north of Detroit. And my father was raised in Shanghai, and he was exported in the middle of World War II. I think largely, in fact, by the fact that his grandfather was wealthy, and he was an importer-exporter, and he knew people he could trust to export his most valuable possession, his son, and quite a bit of, I would think, cash or gold or US dollars, which would be hard to get. But fortunately, China was an ally of the United States, so perhaps that's how he got to dollars. And little Poppy was exported through the interior China, through the roads that were ultimately bombed and destroyed and patrolled by the Japanese, because that was the way to starve the Japanese during World War II. Those were the supply lines to China, rather. To keep the Chinese government and the Chinese army alive was just like what the America was doing for Britain, to keep them alive during World War II. So anyways, my father, Toshi Hoo, arrived in India and got on a merchant marine ship, which was a very dangerous way to get anywhere, because in World War II, unlike other wars, non-military vessels were off limits to warships attacking them. But then in World War II, anything was fair game, which included the bombing of cities like London. And ultimately, the retaliation was bombing all of Germany and then bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Long and short is, my father came to this country because his father sold like roughly 10 blocks of Shanghai in the middle of World War II, which is quite a feat. You know, real estate values would be depressed. Who the hell's buying property? You know, the Japanese are taking over. Did he sell it to the Japanese? I mean, they could just take your property. So I don't know how it had economic value, right? It makes no sense to me. It's something I should have asked my father while he was alive. And whether he understood it or not might have been another question, because he grew up as a rich, nerdy kid, and he had no idea about a lot of things in society, except that he knew there was a lot of graft and corruption, and that was spoiling China, you know. So anyways, he goes to MIT, gets a master's degree there, and then goes for his PhD at the University of Michigan. That's where he met little grandma, Martha Lem, and they got married in '46. And I was born in 1948, December 8th, and I was born in Detroit City Hospital in Detroit. I don't know where in Detroit, but in Detroit. And our first home was really terrible. Our neighbors were the people who worked on the Ford assembly line, and the firemen and the policemen and the garbage pickers. And people would be literally passed out on their lawn, drunk from the night before, and the beer bottles on the ground. And then our neighbors were really mean, and they had a terrible family. They were firemen. The father was a fireman. The kids were mean as can be. So, you know, my friends as a little child wasn't the greatest, slim pickings for friends. Well, I lived there until I was 9, third grade, and then I moved to, my father finally got out of having graduating #1 in his class in his PhD doctoral program, which led him And my parents always were very proud of this. They flew the flag of China at graduation because he was from the country. Whatever country you come from is the flag that is flown. So he got a full ride scholarship. Plus I could see from some of the notes I found of my father that he also ended up doing a lot of the work for his professors, whom they were getting paid for it, and he did it for nothing, which is kind of a sad thing. But you know, little Poppy, when I was a little boy, I remember him drafting, and his hands would move like this, the slide rule, and would be, you know, back and forth and calculations, and then the T-square going up against the edge of a drafting table, and then the triangle would make a vertical line, a 90-degree line. It was moving like really fast and dimensioning. His hands were a blur. And sort of kind of runs in the family because Cousin Richard, which is my dad's brother's son, he's the artist, his hands, he works really fast as well. It's kind of a thing that's part of our... So Margarita, my girlfriend, kind of says, why do you do everything so fast? I said, because that's just the way we're wired. We do everything fast. I clean fast. Anything I can do in less time, I do in less time. Is the way I do everything, except for a couple of things.
You do that because you feel like that runs in your family, or?
No, I just can do it fast, and I'm very efficient, and I get it done, and it's done. It's less time spent doing something that probably I don't really want to do. You know, whether it's washing and waxing a car, cleaning my kitchen, you know, raking leaves, splitting logs, you name it. Even work stuff, I get it done faster. I'm all for it, you know. Just that's true to my father and my family, I think.
What kind of engineer was he?
Mechanical engineering. So his idea was before, you know, I think my father lived in a dream world in a way, being a wealthy family. He was going to take his father's wealth and begin to automate China. So mechanical engineering would be conveyor belts, machines that help make things. So they'd mechanize China. And they could build the equipment to help build other factories, basically. And China was a country of labor. Everything was done by hand.
And did he leave China just to go to school, or was it? Did he go to? Did he leave China to go to the U.S. because of what was happening in China? Was it not?
No, he came here for the best education.
So it was like a choice. It was like a.
Right. He had his bachelor's degree from I can't remember the university. I think it might have been the University of Shanghai. I can't recall. And then he went to private school for high school. Went to St. John's, which is you know, I guess it's a Catholic institution.
There's the phone here. Do you need it?
No, that's my phone. I keep going.
Okay.
Just good. I just want to turn it off.
Okay. So you talked about what you remember about how your father was. What was your mom like when you were a kid? What was she like?
Well, it's interesting.
Working,
No, she was just a mom, house mom. I actually remember in Detroit we had a black maid that would come in and help clean the house. You know, I don't know how much she got paid, but she actually came in and cleaned our house. Think about it, we lived in a really crappy neighborhood with the assembly line workers of Detroit.
So what does that say?
Well, it's just interesting.
Do your neighbors have maids?
No, I think the moms clean their houses. You know.
Were there any other Chinese families that you knew of?
They would have their friends from the University of Michigan who got jobs who didn't go back to China, and there would be parties, and we'd go to these parties, and it'd be a total insane free-for-all because the parents were so involved just eating food and talking about life. They just let the kids run wild, like a pack of wild animals, literally. That's when I shaved Uncle David's eyebrow off his head
Oh my gosh.
with a razor.
How old are you?
Somewhere up till 9 years old, you know.
Yeah.
Just one or both?
Just one.
Oh, poor David.
Yeah. Well, it grew back. He looks fine today. But all the kids, we were running wild like a pack. There was like 20, 30 couples and their kids, which would probably be 2 kids. So it'd be 40 kids. Just, you know, no supervision. while the parents socialized, you know.
Aside from shaving David's eyebrows off, what are your earliest childhood memories?
Well, we lived in a tiny house, and I still have the photograph of it when it went to the realtor. They took photos just like they do today, but they were done on, you know, Kodak Brownie cameras. And on the back of it was a stamp, a rubber stamp, and it said square footage, bedrooms, bathrooms, size of the yard, garage or no garage. So that house sold for like $5,000 when we moved to Cleveland. So 9 plus 48 would be, do the math, you know, 56, 57 roughly, when they sold the house. I was 3 and 6 years older than my brothers. We could play a little bit together, but not a whole lot. We had a sandbox. My dad actually built. Even though he was a PhD mechanical engineer, he couldn't really fix anything.
Interesting.
Well, he could build a sandbox. I guess there was a blueprint for Popular Mechanics or something. It was like 4 boards and 4 posts, and you drive the post into the ground, you screw or nail in the things, and you cut triangles for the seats and the 4 corners, and you buy bags of sand and you just dump it in there.
So what was he designing?
He worked for Anchor Steel, and they developed conveyor belt systems and material handling systems. And it was pretty much conveyor belts to move stuff here to there, and lift packages, lift bags of stuff, lift gravel, whatever you got to move, he could move it. So he had built at work these steel bookcases, really heavy gauge steel, very deep, so you could pack them up. And each bookcase, you know, I don't think you or I could lift it. We'd need 2 moving guys to move a bookcase. They were modular, but still heavy. And so the story goes, every time we moved, half our shipping weight of our house was books. You know, little Poppy was really an academic. He subscribed to all the journals, and he had books from all over the world, different countries. And he took notes. He wrote in the margins and notes. He was constantly studying, you know, all his life, never stopped. Saturday and Sundays. It wasn't like, you know, Monday to Friday. So what I remember is they bought me, that was the beginning of making sheet metal dump trucks and road excavation and cranes that claws that would dig up dirt. So we would build roads and bridges and little lakes and stuff. I don't know how we kept the water where it was. There must have been some clay or something to keep the water there. And I loved to do that for hours, you know, shaping the earth kind of thing.
Do you have any food memories growing up? Any favorite foods?
Well, just I remember, you know, little Poppy worked a ton of overtime. I guess, you know, after the war, all the businesses were booming in America. And they had automated the factories of war, but they hadn't automated the factories of consumer goods. And being in Detroit, you know, they were building cars like crazy, and that had to be automated. Now, I don't know if Dad even touched that type of stuff, my father. Yeah. But he worked a lot of overtime, and then we'd always go out to Chinatown. So a classic Chinese meal would be a Cantonese-style lobster, and that kind of egg foo young type sauce with black bean in it, that flavor in there, and scallions. And pressed duck, it'd be duck kind of flattened out, and then the bones are removed, which is very helpful, you know. So barely crispy skin and Chinese vegetables. So that would be almost every Sunday was kind of a ritual at our house. And then my dad used to love to make egg rolls, and you've had them Toshi has had them when my dad was alive. And we'd make, I don't know, 150 at a time and fry them. And we had a meat grinder. I actually bought an old-fashioned meat grinder, the same version. And as an adult today, with all the strength I've got, it's really hard to turn that thing. So when we were kids, we'd have our two little hands on the meat grinder, and we'd be using all of our muscles, our back, our shoulders, our thighs, or everything to turn that crank, and just to grind pork into ground pork, which is pretty neat. It comes out a little more coarse than most of the grocery stores puree meat today, and I don't really care for that. So they would make 150 egg rolls at a time. We'd be eating them as they came out of the deep fat fryer and they cooled. We did that at the family, Lem family, Hoo family reunion in Black Forest. And that's what we do. We didn't do it outdoors, we did it indoors because it didn't have electric frying or fryers in those days.
Well, I know Little Poppy's family was still in China, but did you know, growing up, any of Grandma's family?
No, little grandma kind of kept to herself. She'd send packages down to her grandmother, who was in D.C.
Her grandmother?
Her mother, rather.
Okay.
Her father had died. Aunt Dorothy was the only people we kind of had ever any contact with, and that would be just once in a while, but we'd get great Christmas presents. Aunt Dorothy didn't have her first and only child, Cousin David, who's a doctor today. He's 18 years younger than me. Exactly 18 years younger than me. And not that he was born on December 8th, but years-wise. So Aunt Dorothy was really big into education and child development, so she bought some really cool toys for us. Shoes, metal shoes with leather straps with springs on it you could bounce on. Those were really fantastic.
Yeah.
I've seen the equivalent high-tech version of that today, but I would love to buy one, but I wonder if it would blow out my knee, because my knee is so fragile now. It really is fragile.
We were talking about living in Columbus, Ohio, right?
No.
Willowick, which is a suburb
Detroit.
of Cleveland.
Cleveland, okay. But then you were saying that when you were walking around town in Ohio, people would...
Yeah, they had not seen any Asians, and so they would be just staring at us like we're a herd of ostriches walking down the street. And their jaw would drop, and their necks would be craning around 190 degrees. And you could feel it, it wasn't real hate, but it wasn't necessarily very affirming at all. But the real racism was in Detroit. My father probably could have bought a better house, I'm guessing, but we had to buy one in a crummy neighborhood where the assembly line workers worked, the lowest wage workers. And like I said before, earlier in the tape, that they sold the house in 1957 roughly for like $5,000, I think, and they paid $2,000 for it, or I can't remember. It was on the back of the photograph. So it doubled in like a short number of years, I guess. But America had a propaganda organization that was called The Big Picture, and it was a newsreel, and it was propagandistic, and it just showed America, winning everything, beating the Axis powers, the Japs and the Germans, and it made little boys in particular who loved warfare. I remember I even had little plastic molded soldiers, World War II style soldiers, and tanks and bazookas, and I don't remember there was an enemy version of but you divide up your soldiers and they'd be fighting the same soldiers, but they'd be the other side. And that's what the kids did, That was probably more involved, more of a drama thing than baseball cards, There was no drama in baseball cards, Baseball cards are a piece of cardboard with a picture on front and statistics on the back, which most little kids couldn't understand. So the drama was in the reenactment of fictitious battles, So anyways, there's there's a winner and loser, and there's the good guys and the bad guys, and I was a bad guy.
But did you make friends?
I don't remember a single friend in Detroit from school. I remember getting really tan and just worried to death about how dark I was going to school, because I'd stand out. You know, I was outside playing all the time. Even though Detroit's pretty north, it has a very strong summer. Hot, humid, strong sun. And I got really tan. My brothers got really tan too. We played. You had nothing to do but play outdoors. And
How did your parents deal with that in Detroit and Cleveland?
well, my dad was busy working, and he was kind of aloof to it in a way. And my mother kind of was familiar with it because her mother was attacked verbally, and she probably grew up with racism in America, but she never really talked about it so much. I remember she went to school. I mean, she had this one story to tell about going to the school, parents' night, I guess it is. It's the one story she would tell. I think you guys know it. That, what's this? She met the school dietitian for the cafeteria. She said, "What's this food you serve on Wednesday?" And the dietitian said, "Oh, that's the kid's favorite food." And she says, "What is it? My son can't stand it. The smell of it makes him nauseous." It says chop suey, which was celery and mystery meat and gravy, like just boiled down to nothing but glop. And probably served with rice, maybe not. Who knows? I can't remember that. But I just remember the smell of that. It just gave me a splitting headache. Like when you smell certain plastics being made or being burned, you get this like headache. You want to get out of the area like right away. Well, that's what that food smelled like. Not like plastic, but I was getting a headache right away, and I was getting nauseous. It was like, really a problem.
Mm.
So did your parents, did they, what did they think of America and white Americans?
Well, I think they knew what racism was. I think my dad was just, you never met him, but Toshi did. Wouldn't you say that little Poppy was sort of aloof of things? He didn't understand American teasing. He didn't really understand a lot of things about social things. So he just he couldn't visually hear it. He couldn't detect these things.
But
I was too young
your
to-
mom probably did.
Yeah, my mom could be sensitized. I think she grew up with it herself, in that little town, where she had to be the only Chinese family as well.
And and Poppy, of course, spoke Chinese. He spoke Mandarin or Cantonese?
Mandarin, yeah.
And then did little grandma speak Chinese in her household, right?
She spoke some Cantonese, but that was it. And those two dialects spoken are not going to function as a way to communicate.
So your parents spoke English to each other?
Yeah. And again, we never lived in a Chinese community because there were none. And they would only, again, for those parties, those Chinese, probably schoolmates, classmates, those parties were the big social connections,
But they were speaking English.
They were speaking Chinese.
Okay.
Yeah, at these parties, some English.
And those
some of the kids are raised in Chinese, I would think. But most of the kids are speaking English because they're in America,
But those kids,
First
there
generation.
weren't that many Chinese kids where you were. Where were those kids from then?
They lived all over Michigan. They
They're
My,
spread
they,
out.
they, they were probably part of the Chinese Student Association at the University of Michigan. That's what I'm guessing.
Oh, right.
But I didn't,
There's a photograph that we have of the Chinese Student Association. I don't know how, I never bothered to count the number of people in the picture. I guess there's like 70 people, just to take a wild ass guess. And,
So it was those friends
Yeah.
and their kids and stuff.
yeah.
I see.
but I don't understand, what, can you explain more, you had experienced racism in different forms in these places, but did you guys, how was it talked about in your house?
Did you tell your parents?
Was it even ever acknowledged?
Well,
or
I
did
obviously,
they say,
obviously,
did they explain
I
it
had
to
to
you,
tell my
or-
mom. Mom was the mom, dealing with the household things. Dad does the work thing, the office stuff, and Mom obviously went to school, and then Mom figured out to talk to. Mario was the boy who walked me to school. pretty Italian name, first generation. Mario walked me to school. He must have talked to Mario's parents saying, you know, hey, this is going on, and we need a little help. And I know Mom came to school to talk to him, and I'm sure they, you know, the teachers have their hands tied. What are you going to do about these situations, you know? You know, it's even today, what are you going to do about these situations? Bullying would be the current version of this, right? It's a form of bullying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you think it affected you as a kid to experience that kind of treatment?
Well, it doesn't make you feel good, you know, being threatened, and not only being threatened verbally, but being acted upon, you know, beat up, you know, punched, kicked, spit on, taunted, you know. But it's not nice, you know. You could imagine what it would be like to be Jewish in Germany in 1932, 1939.
But how did it affect you, do you think?
Well, I mean, you know, it makes you scared. Why would I be concerned about how dark my suntan was, right? When I'm going back to school on the first day of school, I'm going like, shit, you know, this is terrible.
Being hyper aware.
Yeah.
How you look to others. But like, okay, so, like, did the grandma ever explain it to you? Like,
well,
did you guys ever, like,
well, we knew we weren't American.
Or was that just not
we knew we weren't
Chinese
white
American
people.
style?
We just knew we weren't them. I mean, you know, we just could look at I could look at my brothers, look at my parents, and look at the neighbors and go, we're different.
But you guys never talk about it.
No, not really. We didn't. Little Grandma and Poppy didn't have a little social cultural powwow with us, you know, at our developmental level. They didn't have any. Just avoid that kid, you know. Just avoid those situations. That's all you could do.
Do you think it shaped how she raised you and then assimilation?
I think the way I assimilated was, fortunately, I was athletic, and boys like to play sports. And I didn't mind playing sports at all. And I'm still friends with Kerry Sparks today. He lived 2 doors down in Willowick. And his mom just died this year, Mrs. Sparks. It's really interesting. I saw a picture of Mrs. Sparks when she was like 90 years old, and I could still see the young mother that Carrie had when we used to go to their house to go to school, because we were the farthest point from school, and then pick up Carrie and we'd go to school and walk to school. And Mrs. Sparks was always one of those moms, like, how are you, what's new, what's going on, you know, and she wouldn't be, you know, just treating you like, you know, I don't know, like nobody. She got involved.
So Carrie Sparks was a childhood friend.
Yeah.
So you did have some friends that you
Right.
connected.
And John McGlew, he was the son of a U.S. Marine, and he played the accordion. He lived 2 doors away. And then Donnie Moyer was one of 8 kids, and his parents were never home, and that was an amazing household to go into. They ate dog food, and they drank milk. That was their only nutrition. They had big bag of dog food, 50 pounds, underneath the kitchen sink. And his little brother had a scar from his shoulder all the way down through his body. Big, terrible scar, because he got sucked into a washing machine, wringer machine, and it just sucked him in and cut him. And then he had little brothers and sisters running around in diapers, and they were really skinny, because all they could eat some amount of dog food and drink some amount of milk. The father was really nice. He took us all fishing. Apparently his mom was somewhere like a nurse or a nurse's assistant.
They were just super poor?
Super poor, yeah. But they were when I went to their house, they were very warm to me. They had no furniture, hardly anything. They had a sofa where the cushions wouldn't be on the chairs, they'd be on the floor. And there'd be a few toys, and then they had a washing machine, and all I can remember is the kitchen just had big jugs of milk, I guess. That was in the days of milk in glass bottles being delivered, not in plastic 1-gallon jugs like today. And then a 50-pound bag of dog food. And that's what they ate. They literally ate that food.
Oh my gosh.
You know?
What were you eating? Were you eating Chinese food? You were eating American food?
We were eating American food by then. I mean, we pretty much were raised on Chinese food. But as we started going to school and having friends and going to their house and seeing what they eat, we'd ask little grandmother to make that kind of food. And American cooking is not that hard to master, particularly when you boil hot dogs, you make hamburgers, you roast chickens, you open a can of string beans. That's not a hard kind of cuisine to master. And there were recipes at the grocery stores and TV with 60-second commercials, not 10. They didn't have 10-second commercials on TV in those days. They had 60 seconds. You could actually tell you how the 3 things you had to buy to add together to cook a meal.
Yeah, it's like the golden age of semi-homemade food.
Yeah, yeah. So we started eating American food at that point. And then my mom would make on the weekends some Chinese food, but then little Poppy still, he made more money every time we kept moving and get better jobs. And so, they paid for us to, fly wherever we're going. I think we probably drove from Detroit to Cleveland. I don't remember flying, but maybe we did. They put us up in a hotel, there'd be a rental car, and a realtor, and help us buy us a house. And, I was so little then, I don't remember buying that little house. But we just played sports all the time. And that's where I learned to swim, in this public pool of Willowick.
But you also lived in Syracuse?
Right, so we
or
moved
White
from
Plains,
Willowick to Syracuse. And
So how many years were you in Willowick?
I was in Willowick
You said 9 you moved in?
4th and 5th grade.
Okay.
Sure.
So we would always go, we'd always look for the house whenever, and then not move to disrupt the school year until July. We'd always move. So when we moved to Syracuse, little Puppy worked for General Electric Systems Division, which is a military operation, defense contractors. It pays the best, more challenging work. And we moved into a new housing development that was bulldozed. There was nothing but dirt and a couple of trees. And literally our backyard was total dirt. So we had nothing to do. I remember, I can't believe this. I remember we had a little bit of lawn in Cleveland, and I don't know why we'd have a gasoline-powered lawnmower, but we had a push mower from Detroit. So I don't remember when we got gasoline, but I think it was in Cleveland, that the moving company actually shipped the lawnmower and a gallon of gasoline in the back of the van. It's like, that's damn dangerous. Long and short is we ended up in Syracuse, East Syracuse. There's new houses being built, plywood 2x4s. There's no kids except for the one kid across the street, Tom Roxon, who I still am in contact with. He now lives in Denver area. And it's an interesting story on him. And it was just dirt around our house. But we got to pick our bedrooms. This is an important little detail. We got to pick our bedrooms in this brand new house that was already partially built. We got to pick the bedroom, pick the color, stuff like that. Each of the boys, my brothers and I. And had 2-car garage, really big house, and a gigantic basement. We had nothing to do because we moved there in the summertime, didn't know a soul. And I figured out, hey, we could take this gasoline and do a lot of interesting stuff in the backyard and not set any fires because there's nothing to burn down. It's all dirt. Total dirt. Dirt, dirt, dirt. No grass. Not a lick of grass. Not even dead grass. It's pure dirt. So I said, let's just draw a line in gasoline like 50 feet long. And I knew that gasoline was highly flammable, so I knew better. I took a piece of newspaper and lit it on fire with a match, and I threw the wad of newspaper on the gasoline. And that very first time I ever did it, I never realized that when that gasoline burns, it's going to go like a rocket from one end of the line to the other end. You could not run that. It's like a rocket. And then we started writing our names in gasoline, making designs in the dirt, and lighting it on fire. We had nothing better to do. There was nothing to do.
Where's your mom?
Grandma had no idea.
They had no idea what was going on in the backyard.
Any serious injuries? Or you just
No, none at all. We always stood back and threw the newspaper in.
Didn't you also hijack a bulldozer one time?
Yes.
Well, that was in Detroit. Yeah,
How old were you
When you
then?
were little.
probably 8 or 9.
What,
We
what's the story
we
there?
used to. There's this one kid. I can't remember his name. He was a friend. I don't remember where he lived in the neighborhood, and we'd go like 3 blocks away from our house and 2 blocks over. There was a railroad track near a penny candy store. So we'd go there to buy candy, and then we'd go up to the railroad track and put pennies on the railroad tracks to have the freight trains roll over them. And it would flatten them, and penny turns into like a 25-cent piece in copper. And then we saw on the other side of the tracks, they're building this gigantic like warehouse or distribution center. 20-foot ceilings, massive concrete block walls, and we saw them with a bulldozer there. And we would just sit there watching, because little boys love to watch construction. So my playmate and I remember his name, we watched the fact that when they go home, they just throw the key in this one little box in the back, and there's no lock on it. And we went down there and we started up the bulldozer.
Oh my god.
And we didn't watch him enough to know, like, what do you do with all the sticks you squeeze and you move them back and forth, but we knew that's what you did. So that I actually put it into it's a classic gear shift from heavy equipment. You have to squeeze the 2 handles together so that you can move it to the next location on the gear shift. And I put one in the train, which is part of trains, for Adrian. So we were moving the levers, and there's some foot pedals too, which probably turn the tractor treads to, if the right tread is going, that means you'll make a left-hand turn, right? So we didn't understand that. Our powers of observation weren't that great for learning how to run a complex machine. Long and short, we got it going. We jumped off of it, and it drove. It's like an army tank. It drove right into a brand new wall of concrete block, and it's so powerful. We actually wondered if it went through that wall and then through the other side. We didn't stick around to find out what happened.
You jumped off before it hit the wall?
Yeah, we were way off of it. We were back at the railroad tracks on the other side of it, just peeping our little heads over, watching the bulldozer at a super slow speed, at a super low gear. When you're in a low gear, that means nothing's going to stop that thing, right? So it went right through a brand new concrete block wall that just had been built that day. Smashed that right through. And again, only in hindsight, knowing about low gear ratios and motors like that, I don't know why. What would stop that thing at the other end? There's got to be another wall somewhere, right? We never stuck around. We didn't go back in the building to check out what the hell happened to it.
gosh.
We were just watching it from afar and said, well, I think it's time to get out of Dodge, and we left,
Alright, Adrian's not allowed to watch this video until he's 18.
Did you ever tell Grandma that story? Like later?
Yeah, I did.
Oh.
She didn't believe it. She goes, "Oh, come on, this kind
Really?
of stuff, I mean, it could have driven through many walls. That's my thought.
Right, like what would have just kept going?
Because it's so strong a motor at such a low gear. That's not built for speed. It's built for power.
Well, I want to make sure I want to get a good history a little bit. So you went from
Syracuse
to White Plains? No, never White Plains?
to Bedford.
Oh, okay. So just New York.
White Plains is where cousin David grew up.
Oh, okay. So you
Yeah.
went to Bedford. What year did you go to Bedford? And Bedford,
So in
Massachusetts?
Syracuse, this is interesting. So sports was really important. We played sports, and I had a bunch of really good friends, and we actually went bowling every Saturday morning. And we bowled in a league, and we had a lot of fun together. We hung out, and then we used to go to one of the kids' houses. His dad rented films, be the equivalent of video rental company, like Video 13. He had Video 13 for commercial films. His house is full of films, so we used to go over to his house and pop popcorn and watch films. And this kid, I can't remember his name, I used to remember it, knew how to load film into a 16 millimeter projector. And there was just thousands of films in this house. That's how his dad made a living. And we watched films on like insane topics. I can't even remember what they were, but we'd watch films all day long. And that was for young boys, it was crazy fun, And he lived in downtown East Syracuse, which was this railroad town. And there was nothing there but one bar. And it had a bowling alley. It had like 3 lanes in it. We used to go there bowling after we'd bowled at a really fancy modern place that had 20 or 40 lanes. went to this bar, had nobody in it but guys sitting at the bar drinking. And we'd go bowling there, and we'd pay for one game, but we'd bowl like 30 games, you know. They didn't care. You know.
How old were you?
We were in 6th and 7th grade.
You bowling in a bar?
Yeah. In fact, we got so crazy, our little hands we'd go back with the ball and it'd go flying off, and it would hit the, you know, those fiberglass chairs. Hit that, and the bartender wouldn't give a damn about it. You know, wouldn't be like, get out of here, you kids. They were just, they didn't care. You know, we would score 1 or 2 games and pay for that. It was like 35 cents a game on top of it. And we'd bowl like 20, 30 games, and then we'd go watch films all afternoon.
Did you encounter less racism in Syracuse?
I didn't feel it at all, really.
Was it more diverse? Or
No,
just
we were the
people's
only
attitudes?
Asians. There were no black kids. There was no Indian. You know, we were the only non-whites. But I was good in sports, and the guys that were good in sports were, I don't know if we were popular, but we got along really well together, and we hung out. I through Tom Roxon, my friend, he actually remembers all these kids. He went through high school with them. He knows them all by name. He can name them all, and I have them written down somewhere. I can sort of remember them. The kid with the films, I can't remember that kid.
So
And the kid, there was a kid who was older at the end of our street, and Hugh Lowry was his name. He was a high school super athlete, and he lived at the end of our street, and he used to drive us to junior high, which is behind the high school, and drop us off, which was really kind because we'd have to walk in freezing, terrible upstate New York weather. So we used to clean his windshield of his jalopy with our bare hands and wait in the car freezing. And it's winter in upstate New York, and then he'd drive us there. And he had a younger sister in high school, and she'd ride with us. And we were pretty cool getting dropped off by this high school superstar athlete. But what was interesting about sports is, you know, at our local elementary school, the high school didn't have enough facilities, so the high school wrestling team practiced at my elementary school. And one of my little buddies and we used to just hang out there and watch the practices. And the coach says, hey, you two, come on down, you can do the same stuff that we're doing. So we just did everything the high school did. All the calisthenics. You put yourself upside down on your neck to make your neck strong. It's called bridging. We did all the maneuvers, all the takedowns when you're standing up, all the rules, we learned that, and all the how to, you know, counteract things and get out of things. We did everything, literally every day. And we didn't get to wrestle because we were underage, and so sports is really big in upstate New York. Huge caravans of school buses would go from one school district to another to play that other team, and parents and the town members in cars would caravan over to that other school, and so there'd be thousands of people showing up for a basketball game. But before the basketball game, which Hugh Lowry played on, and he was a starter, was the wrestling team, which is where I would practice with. So that happened first, wrestling, and then the basketball, and that was a big event. And that coach had won the state championships like 4 years in a row. Had I stayed there, I'm sure what I would have been on his team, and I'm sure I would have been good because we were really good doing what we were doing. So there's another example of sports. That didn't help me too much socially, except that now the kids in high school treated us really nicely. You know, we were kids. You know what we used to wear? We'd wear our shirts and long underwear. That was our version of, because wrestling's in the wintertime. And so there was this, like, you've seen it, that kind of underwear. It's kind of corrugated looking. It's cotton. Mm-hmm. That's what we wear. That's what long underwear was like in those days, period. That's the only style it was made. We would wear that and a t-shirt and wrestle. And the coach, being the winning coach, he had the janitors turn the heat up in there. We practiced at nearly 100 degrees. That makes you able to wrestle. It's 70 degrees really well. because wrestling is intensely physical. I mean, you burn you right out as fast as you can believe. So we did all the running, all the conditioning, all the calisthenics, just like those high school kids did. And they really took us under our wings, and then, you know, it was this whole thing. But then I moved out of there, and, you know, we started socializing and things like that, and I didn't find any problems with girls and things like that. We were all really friendly and stuff. Then I moved to Bedford. I moved there, and again in July. Moved into a neighborhood, brand new house that was built.
And how old were you then when you moved to Bedford?
13.
Why did you guys move to Bedford?
Dad got a job with we worked for a lot of companies, Sylvania, GTE, Sylvania, Raytheon, all those kind of companies. I can't remember which company actually hired him.
Okay.
So we stayed in downtown Lexington in a motel when we were looking for a house.
Okay.
And we drove around looking to buy a house. And then we bought a house in Bedford. They wanted to get by in Lexington. Maybe they couldn't afford Lexington. They always went for the best school system, being a Chinese family. Lexington was rated top school system.
So the house that we know, is that the first house they bought there?
It's the only one they bought.
Okay.
You moved to Bedford.
Yeah, in the summertime, and then I took a summer school class because, I knew my academic load would be steep. And Miss Blakeney was my French teacher. She was a regular teacher. But I was the only kid who wasn't repeating it because I failed. And I was actually there to learn, so she really liked me. And blah, 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 I did my best. I'm not really good at learning languages like Lily is. And, I had to kill myself to get whatever I could learn. And she took us down to C'est Bon, which was on Arlington Street, right by it was a French patisserie, C'est Bon. They made really good croissants. And then she took us to a restaurant for dinner. We ordered escargot, that kind of thing. And then I had her for a teacher later on in the school year, but that's how I started at Bedford. And I started 8th grade. And, I was in the top classes, whatever that was. And I made friends. And had my first girlfriend, which is Marty Dodge, who I'm still friends with today. We're like brother and sister today. She's in L.A. Her husband is a retired college professor. Somehow I became popular. I don't know how. I got elected to be president of the class in my freshman year. In 8th grade, you get the elections for the freshmen of the next year. And I did sports. I played freshman football. It was a lot of fun, but I don't think I pole vaulted or did track. I just did that freshman football. And I took a lot of classes. I was in the top tier of kids. A lot of kids are smarter than me, but I was with the smartest kids. We took everything a year ahead of everybody else. We just did all that stuff. I kind of realized pretty quickly that it was a lot of maintenance to be in the clique. That was a word that developed in my generation, being in the clique, in or out, exclusivity. And I was very much in for some reason. And we were the only Chinese family. There was one other black family, Bedford. The brother and sister were a year or two older than me. They were the only black family. And then there was a black kid that moved in through the Air Force Base, Hanscom Field. And there were no Asians that ever moved in. There's only one other black kid. He was pretty good in sports. And the black family lived actually pretty close to us, near the cemetery where little Poppy and Grandma are buried, in a nice Victorian house. I know nothing about their family, what their mom and dad did for a living. They weren't academically in my league, and they were older, so I didn't really have social contact with them, except for riding the school bus. But I was popular, but it was like, I could already feel it was like very high maintenance to be part of all this clique. And it just kind of wore on me, and I kind of just, every year, just like, oh my God, this is just too much fucking work. And then I didn't see the jokes anymore. I didn't give it. I just didn't care. So I started making friends in other schools, gradually.
For sports or how?
Well, actually, I competed against Dick Peterson from Lincoln Sudbury in pole vaulting, and then we became best friends. His school allowed him to take the pole vaulting equipment and keep it going all fall until it got to be, winter time. We used to pole vault until we thought the poles would crack. We were using fiberglass and bending them, and none of our coaches knew anything about it, so we were just doing it purely experimental. And that's
in one shot.
That's how I broke my front tooth. My pole exploded, and it hit me in the face, and the bottom end of it went down the runway. It almost speared Dick Peterson. Would have actually stuck right in his stomach had it hit him. And then we trained together, we socialized, and then I met other kids from other schools. Had a girlfriend from another school, Littleton, Massachusetts. She actually came to me to the senior prom, and she was kind of a hippie girl, which was really not happening. She was from a Unitarian family, they're more liberally progressive, and they were into the race issues. As you can imagine, Unitarians, race issues and the anti-war movement. And so she had a little daisy painted on her cheek. And she was like 2 years younger than me, and her parents didn't see any problem with me dating her. Took her to my prom, and I can remember everybody going and saying, "Who's that girl with me?" The prom was at the Hanscom Field Air Force Base. In my class, John Long was a good friend of mine. His dad was the commander of that whole base. So when I used to drive my dad's old jalopy station wagon, which was rusting out, and Dick Peterson and I painted Virginia Beach or bust black paint on white car. That was our surfmobile. We were going to go to Virginia Beach and go surfing. So we painted that on the side of the car. We'd drive in the military base, and they'd be saluting us because John's sitting in the car. And you'd be stupid not to be the sentry, not to know the commander's kids, and the wife. So we'd go to the base, and they'd salute, and it was kind of a crazy, stupid joke. But then all my classmates were smart, and their dads are pretty much not as high as John's dad. John's dad was he was the top commander of the whole friggin' shooting match. But they were all pretty much in the same neighborhood. The neighborhoods on a base are designed by rank. Just like in real life, there's a pecking order. Well, the base is designed that way. We used to go skiing on the base. They had a little rope tow, go down a little stupid hill. And because, I'm with these military kids.
Did Grandma work at this time?
She finally started working because, we were all big kids, and she worked as a human resource manager for a company, I think it was Portex in Billerica, Massachusetts. She'd hire people and deal with, personnel issues, benefits, all that kind of stuff. So she did that for a bunch of companies, Portex, Microwave Associates. I can't think of any other names, but they're the high tech community right around Bedford, Burlington, Billerica. All her jobs right there. Shoot out Route 62 and go to work.
So after high school, what happened for you after high school?
Well, little Poppy got laid off, and I got accepted to Syracuse University, which I thought I wanted to go to school there. And I said, well, I can go to UMass, and save the family some money. So I went to UMass. I hated it. It was too big. Everybody seemed identical, like rubber stamped out. And then I don't know how I heard about it, but the museum school had a summer program to see if you liked it, and they'd see if they liked you too. I did really well there.
But when did you get into art?
I sort of made a switch then,
That was the first time you ever got into art?
Yeah, well, in Syracuse, they had an Everson Museum, which actually IMP ultimately designed their building, their new building, but in an old building, beautiful old limestone building. I used to take the bus into Syracuse from East Syracuse and take art lessons at the Everson Museum. Drawing, painting classes. Still life, pretty much.
Was it just a curiosity, or did you find a passion?
I don't know. I just I realized I was really good in math and science. It wasn't a challenge to me. Chemistry was a little challenging. I don't know why. I didn't find math and science really too hard. There's some stuff I couldn't get right away, but I would get it. I didn't feel. And I took art in high school. Donald Barron was our art teacher. And I did it, and he did the best he could. And I had a little bit of fun. But I don't know, it just appealed to me that art would be pretty cool. You know, and I was still a chemistry and economics major. You know, it was easy to do science and math. It wasn't hard at all.
But you went to museum school. Was, I understand, it's pretty experimental, right? So like.
Well, it was, and I had no idea it was going to be that either. I had no idea.
You just kind of.
So what was that? How did your parents react to that? Let me just see.
It was pretty interesting. You know, this is really important. You're the parent here, Lily. They mentioned that my father had graduated #1 at University of Michigan and got a full ride scholarship and the flag flown at graduation, but they never said you have to do that. And they let me do sports, which competed with studying. And I'd come home tired, you know, because I really put myself in the sports. I had a lot of fun. And I studied hard. I studied my ass out till like 11:30 midnight, and I studied Saturday and Sunday probably 5 hours each day. They made school really hard, that school system. So when you guys went to Brookline and you had never had any friggin' homework, I was going like, what kind of school system is this? How could they ever compete? But then everybody did well in going to college, get good grades. But so somehow Brookline figured out how to teach you how to learn better than where I was. And then all our teachers at Bedford High would say, this is what it's going to be like when you get to college. You know, so we're getting you ready for college. So, you know, we're getting ready for the battlefield. You know, you're in Marine Corps boot camp, and that's what they did it. So they kind of punished us in a way, you know, to get us ready. So I had to write so many term papers in high school. I get to college, and it was like, where are the term papers, you know?
But did you go straight to you went to UMass for how long?
1 year.
1 year, and then you transferred to museum school?
Yeah, because I really enjoyed it. And then Fritz Buhner was one of the key members of the program. He was the head of the sculpture, and I was really good at sculpture. Anything I touched could turn into something really quickly. And I didn't see any barriers. One thing about my childhood, I always made things. I was always building things. So little Poppy and Grandma bought the cheapest friggin' tools known on the planet Earth. And that'll make you get hurt, by the way. Screwdrivers that they don't keep that straight edge. They get rounded off so you slip. Saws that are cheap, and they'll buck out and they'll end up cutting your hand. So I cut my hand a million times. Little stupid hammers that were like child's hammers, where the claws to pull the nails out would snap off, and the hammers didn't have enough mass to hit something. So when you're holding the nail and you're hitting a nail that should be hammered by a real adult hammer, you just brutalize your hand. So I was always making stuff, and they had a drill you crank, and my skin would always get caught in the gears. I mean, I really hurt myself a lot, but I was having so much fun building stuff. So I always built stuff, and they buy 2x4s, which is a harder wood than pine, by the way, if you don't know that. You cut a 2x4, cut a pine board with a handsaw, you'll know immediately those are two different pieces of wood. But I needed 2x4 because I wanted the mass of it. So I learned how to work with all this stuff. And then finally I got big enough to tell my dad didn't care, you know, let's buy this tool. Or I bought the tool. I started working in high school. I worked at Bowen's craft store, hobby and craft store in the shopping center in the middle of Bedford. For Cheryl Bowen, my future classmate, which I would never know that the guy who had a daughter, I'd be his daughter's classmate. I worked in that store. I bought a Craftsman tool kit. I bought the belt sander I still have today. The jigsaw that I had, which I think I gave to Diego, I bought that myself. I bought real tools for a change. I bought tools, and then I taught Grandma into buying some real tools when I was back in Syracuse. And
Tom Roxon's dad knew what tools were, so we did most of the construction over at his house because he had real tools. And we were always building stuff.
Like what?
We built a catapult called the Cool Cat 9. We saw it in a like a medieval film, so we could build that. So we just built one. Our downfall was we couldn't figure out where to get a rubber band that was going to be strong enough for that. We used inner tube, and it was the wrong properties of elasticity. But we built a catapult.
So you'd been building stuff, and then you got
Go-karts.
You got to the museum school, and you really found that you were drawn towards sculpture. And talk about life there. And isn't that when you met Mom? And actually, I was born, right? You were still at
Yeah,
museum school?
well, you were born after. You were born, you know, just to get the record straight. You were born a year after we were married. You know?
Okay, it's on the record.
Okay.
But how did you meet Mom, and what were you doing there at that time, and what were you like?
Well, I kind of got into museum school, and the dean of the school really liked me. All the deans liked me. I don't know why. They just really liked me. And there's all these kids that stand out. And I went to school with Franciscan friar, Roman Catholic priest, a guy, I can't remember his name, but I can see him. He got out of the Navy. He was a little wacky. Another guy got on another branch of service. He was a little wacky. The dean of the school ultimately married one of my classmates from the summer program. Was an older woman. So this huge heterogeneous mix of people. So how could I stand out? You know, I looked like an 8th grader when I was in college. I really did, you know. And then that was the era of the civil rights. So, you know, all the black men would say, "Hey, brother," and it's like, who are you talking to? You know? They do the, you know, the whole brother thing, and I learned how to do that. And I became a brother, you know. And here I am. I look like an 8th grader. And it's like, what goes? You know? You're having sex, I'm not. You know? What are you talking about? Just miraculous things happened to me. I ended up working I thought I'd become an architect because I had all the math and science, you know. It wasn't hard to do. And I thought it'd be good to be an architect. And I wanted to be an architect. So one dean sent me down to the Lewis Wharf to meet some friends of his that worked on this special project because I was interested in technology and art. It was called the Environmental Ecology Lab. It was in the 4th floor of Lewis Wharf, which was undeveloped warehouse space right on the waterfront. All of it was like abandoned, but Carl Koch owned that. And his son was Otto Koch. I met him, and we became best friends. Otto was 10 years older than me. He had a beard. He was a jazz musician. He was a jazz pianist at Berklee College of Music. I met him. We became best friends. His girlfriend was Poppy Cox, the daughter of Gardner Cox, the painter of all the presidents and the presidents of all the corporations in America. They lived in a mansion in Cambridge, North Cambridge, by Brattle Street, in a mansion. And their house was like their foyer, you know, you could play basketball in their foyer. They had oil paintings from all over the world. They were millionaires probably, and they were part of society. Otto Koch's mom divorced Carl Koch and married Louis McMillan, who was Walter Gropius's right-hand man. He was the Architects Collaborative. He was the founder of the Bauhaus in Germany, the School of Design and Architecture. And then Don, one of my best friends, was a professor of mine. He asked me, I never even took a class from him, he asked me to co-teach a class with him, which I invented the class and designed the whole curriculum. And it was a super smashing success.
What was the class?
Called X1, because for experimental art. This is the first time it was being offered. So I just set up field trips to go look at different types of new processes and techniques, like chrome plating. We went to a chrome plating factory. It was like in Waltham, Massachusetts, so we had field trips. And I remember the chemical smell was terrible, and they had these big vats, chemicals and electrical current going into it, and these baskets, and they'd throw stuff in there. So you have to chrome plate things. And you have to get the chrome, you got to copper plate things, and you got to plate it with something else, and then you finally put on the chrome. That's the process. So my classmates were all these hippie girls, no bras, wearing loosely fitted tops, their tits are hanging out, everything. And we go to this place, and these guys are just blue collar factory workers. It's not a high paying job. It's probably a dangerous job. Chemicals. We went to places like that. And we went to plastics places, and we went to a sign shop that made neon. That's how I got into neon, making neon sculptures, because these guys are nice enough I could pay them, and they would do it for really cheap to make neon sculptures for me. So that's the class I taught at the museum school with Don, and Don became a mentor of mine. And Don knew a million people, even though he just moved to Boston. At his parties would be professor of this from MIT, professor of that from Harvard at a party. And that's how I met Walter Gropius, through Don Moulton.
Sorry, hold on, I gotta change batteries. So we gotta wrap because we're going to your birthday dinner soon. But you were saying that this is when you met really your mentor Don Moulton, and
right. So I got introduced to Walter Gropius. I went to his office. He was the head of the School of Architecture at MIT. He says, "Why don't you come to dinner?" And I said, "Well, I don't have a car," because he said he lived in Lincoln, Massachusetts. He said, "No problem. You just come over here this date. Come over to my office. You ride over to my house, and then somebody's going to be at my house." Because his wife entertained in a kitchen as small as my kitchen in my art loft, which you've seen. She'd have 10, 12 people there every night cooking food. And I became a personal friend of the Gropius family. And he gave me a complete guided tour of his house to the absolute nth detail, and that house was full of details. And I would go out there probably once or twice a month for dinner. And he knew I was a poor student, so he was glad to have me over. And then somebody would be driving back into Boston, and they'd just drop me off at the subway, and I'd get home, But Otto Koch, back to Otto, we became best friends. I left rock and roll because I got into jazz, and I love mainstream jazz. And I went to the last two Newport Jazz Festivals on the actual jazz festival field, on the welded steel I-beam stage that all the legends ever in American mainstream jazz ever stood on. I got to go to the last two. And through Otto, I was still interested in architecture. I got to see how his dad ran his firm. And we were there all the time. I ended up working on helping to build his dad's 50-foot boat that he hired a naval architect to design, and I worked on it with Otto one summer, and it was a really amazing summer. And then we got connected to the North End Mafia, because on the wharf was the Mafia, and they took us around and introduced us at every one of the Italian-American clubs in the North End, introduced me and Otto, which meant we could park our cars anywhere with the motors running, and they would never get stolen. Nothing would be taken out of our cars, and then we could go places, and we would never have any trouble. Our tires would never be slashed, is what Tony Cello was his name. He took us around, took a whole morning one day. It was kind of an experience to be introduced like that. So Otto's mom divorced his dad and married Louis McMillan, who is, again, the right-hand man of Walter Gropius. And they lived in a palatial, beautiful house in Concord, Massachusetts. And Otto's mom was part of the social fabric of Greater Boston. So we got invited to the who's who of the adult, what's happening in all of Boston's parties, all over, North Shore, South Shore, catered events with tents, meeting all the politicians, all the who's who. The Taylor family actually went to 2 parties at the Taylor family. They owned the Boston Globe. That was when a family owned a newspaper. That was the end of that part of that era. And they were involved in politics and everything else. And they cared about their community. And there I am getting invited to these parties. And it was just kind of an interesting time. And then back to this environmental ecology lab, I worked with a physicist, 2 electrical engineers, a woman that was in college, but she hardly ever showed up. And they were building human subsystems because they were super technologists. And this was funded by a guy named I think his name was Peter Osifer. He was a investment banker out of Switzerland. He lived in Switzerland, but he loved technology and art. He funded this personally, privately. They rented that loft. They paid minimum wage to everybody, so I'm told. And they rented all this computer systems, and they could buy all this technology stuff to make all this stuff that they wanted to make. So I went over there, and through my dean, introduced me to the guy named Jim Bever, who was a member of their team. He said, well, just hang around us. Come on in. And I came in, hung around them, and I watched them do what they're doing. And one guy was building a camera system that replicated the eye movements of when an eye sees a space, how it analyzes it. He was a physicist, and then he was one of their main programmers into analog computers, not digital computers. We had a whole bank of analog computers that we'd rented. He had written a ton of code for that. And then there was another project going on, which I can't even remember what that was. And then they said, you know what? So what I would do is they had all this stuff over there. They had tanks of helium. They had Mylar. I started saying, you know, I could do something with that Mylar. And I said, can I buy something? They said, sure. What's it cost? And I said, like $100. I said, no problem. Go buy it, whatever it is. I bought this heat sealing machine, which has an electronic frequency to weld Mylar film together. I started building lighter than air sculptures out of silver Mylar. And they had all these industrial catalogs, because that was before the internet. And I could read that stuff, and I figured out what kind of plastics to order, and I said, can I buy this stuff? And I said, sure, buy it. And I started making lighter than air sculptures, and I had tanks of helium there. I just filled up the sculptures with helium. I had like 6 tanks of helium. I don't know why they ever had helium, but I just saw it as an opportunity. So I would go work there in the middle of the night, because I was still going to school, and I'd work all night long. And it was unheated warehouse. And they had this one area full of lambskin rugs or something like that, or throws, and I would and full of foam rubber padding, and it was called the playground or something. I can't remember what they called it, a think tank. I would go there and fall asleep there under a pile of that stuff to keep warm, but I would work all night long making these sculptures, and they'd come in the daytime, probably around 10 o'clock in the morning, see all these sculptures floating around in this gigantic loft full of all this high-tech equipment. And they just like, wow, that's really cool stuff, and they loved it, you know. And they wouldn't wake me up because they knew I was exhausted. And then they said that, you know, I think it was Jim came over and said, you need a project of your own, you know, something more serious than that sculpture. And he said, well, what would you like to do? And I said, well, I'd like to build a muscle and nervous system, because I see you're replicating human body parts, so I'm more mechanical. I like to create a muscle system and sensors and wire it up to the computer and have it react to touch when we touch it, and it touches itself. And so they dropped everything and said, well, how would we do it? So here I am. I look like an 8th grader. These guys are all 45, 55 years old. One was 20-some years old. He was a recent Harvard grad 6 or 7 years ago. They're all working for me. It was like the strangest thing. So they started inventing all this stuff. Some of this stuff could have been patented, literally. And I built this thing called the pod. I don't know why we call it pod, P-O-D, but it was bags of Freon, and it happened to be the Freon company for refrigeration. The biggest supplier of all that crap was like on my way from my apartment to the subway. I walked right by there, and I used to go in there and order stuff from there. And we would take Freon of 3 different temperatures, and because Freon turns into gas at different temperatures, we were taking those differentials, and we could use it to expand and contract different plastic chambers, which I used. I took that technology from the Mylar welding. We used that, and we'd fill it with different Freon and make different shapes. So I was the designer of the shapes, because the shapes would cause different kinds of movement when they expanded out. So I was designing the muscles, and they came up with the idea of stretch sensors. When you stretch a sensor, this plastic film, which we could also weld onto the other plastic that was being filled with the Freon, it would detect increase in resistance, and that could be information that would be analog information fed into analog computers into the program. And all this whole living organism had to live in the Frankenstein laboratory on dry ice. So we had a dry ice supplier always delivering dry ice to us, and we had huge 6-inch thick styrofoam, construction billets. We built the coffin that our Frankenstein lived in, which I designed, and it had 1 million wires going into it and then going to the computer. And then Freon coming in on plastic tubing and to replenish it. But to keep Frankenstein alive, we used to have to put him down to really low temperatures, because if he expanded, it would explode. His muscles would just explode. And I built this system called the pod system. It was the #1 thing produced out of that laboratory.
Very cool. I think we need to wrap here, but that's an incredible story to end on. We'll catch more later. Thanks, Dad.
Mm-hmm.
What year was that?
69.
Wow. All right. So it is, let's see. It's November 26th, 2018. We just came back from Tahoe Thanksgiving. We're in San Mateo, California, at Eliza's house. And we're going to just do a little bit more cap interview here. We got only about 30 minutes, so let's see if we can cover a little bit more ground. So I think we talked a little bit about you being at the museum school in Boston, and I know that's the time where you met Mom and eventually had me, and you guys got married, and maybe you could talk a little bit about where you were living and what were you doing outside of school.
I had gotten my first loft space, and it was in a real commercial building that ultimately became a bona fide artist loft with legal living. Decades later, but I was on the frontier of it all with other artists living in the building. And we didn't have bathrooms. We had industrial urinals and toilets, no hot water and no heat on after the main part of the Monday through Friday. So it was very rugged living. And my friends Jay and Denise from school were 2 hippies and lived together. And they became friends with the manager of a restaurant called La Crepe on Boylston Street, right across from Saks Fifth Avenue, or Lord & Taylor's. I can't remember which store, but it's probably Lord & Taylor's, right on Boylston Street. And I think it was a fairly fashionable restaurant. They made crepes and served other foods, omelets and things. And Jay and Denise were real good friends with one of the managers, and he was young. He was only like 3 years older than us, and he was from France. Jean-Pierre had kind of an attitude. He married an American girl. And again, Jay and Denise were the ones that worked there, and they had a relationship, and I was one of their best friends. So I got a job there. It was like, no, I don't even think I filled out paperwork other than my social security number. And so I learned how to make crepes, and and a lot of the stuff was made up ahead at the time, and then some of the stuff was made there by Spanish-speaking chefs, and it turned into a party place. Yeah, the other manager was Peter from England, and he was an alcoholic, and I was in charge of giving all the wine and beer out, so I would give the waitresses all the wine and beer that Peter wanted, and by 9 o'clock at night, 9:30, he was falling asleep in the corner because pretty much, business had fallen off, and he could sit in the corner and take a nap under the influence. And then the party began. We kept passing out the beers and wine to the waitresses and the cooks, and we just had a good time. So I met your mother because I said, she lived in an ordinary apartment. I said, I don't have a shower, could I take a shower? And then I went over, took a shower, and we just started talking. We talked a lot.
But she was working there?
Yeah, I sort of forgot. Barbara Karras, which was her married name. Barbara, what's Barbara's maiden name? Sinisvet. Hans and Ingrid. That'd be like an aunt and uncle. So Barbara was retaliating against the Bernathen tightly controlled family upbringing, and she was, sowing her oats in Boston. And she got Mom a job there, and that's how I met them. Barbara was real flirtatious. Your mother was just kind of quiet. And Barbara spoke French, which was helpful in the restaurant because a couple of staff people spoke French. We had people with master's degrees working there as waitresses. I mean, yeah, had their master's already. So, you know, it's a college town. People need jobs. And so I just asked Wendy Soneson if I could take a shower, and I took a shower at her house, and we just stayed up talking all night long, and we had more showers and more talking, and that's how we got to know each other.
What was she like?
Well, she had the same values, you know, even though she grew up in a very different kind of cultural environment. You know, the daughter of a minister in a Republican church with, you know, highly skewed socioeconomic demographics, and pretty much an all-white institution on top of it. And they're a very insular type community, for sure. And so your mother slightly rebelled, but hardly at all, because, you know, there was no room. There's, you know, you'd have to go off the deep end to cut yourself some real space. And your mother wasn't about to do that. She had her one big fling was taking a trip with somebody, I can't remember who, it was one of their girlfriends, across the country in a Volkswagen. And, you know, I don't know how much of a real odyssey that was, other than obviously Mom and Dad weren't there, and there was, you know, whatever. And she didn't really do a lot of marijuana or anything. You know, she was pretty conservative, you know. So sowing her oats was just not having Mom and Dad there, I think, really. And she mentioned she met Ken Kesey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and, you know, I'm sure he liked young women around him, you know. You know, he was a celebrity for having written that book, and now it was about to be produced as a movie. So, you know, he was a celebrity of some sort. So, you know, your mother was, you know, absolutely really beautiful woman. I remember when we were first married, walking around the Esplanade, the guys would be watching her walk around, and they'd crash their bikes, literally, you know. And I sort of, you know, it was sad that they crashed their bikes, but it was kind of funny, you know. It's a typical guy thing, you know.
So how did your relationship develop, and how did you guys end up getting married?
Well, we went. She invited me down to go to Bernathen for Thanksgiving, and I think we were over at I forget which aunt's name. She did the catering. Remember which one that is? Yeah. She had the 18 kids, and we ate at a couple people's houses because the extended family was so huge, right? Remember, Grandma Rose had, what, 140 grandchildren? Great, and all that. So we went around to, you know, they pretty much had cornered the market on card tables in Bernathen to make these long tables. And so I'm sure we were at Aunt Judy and Uncle Leon's house for part of the day and part of one course or two, and we were over at can't remember the aunt. She did the catering. She was just a pretty powerful woman, you know, strong and all types of strength. And her husband was Uncle David. That's all I can remember. I can't think of her name. And then, you know, we hung out with her cousin. Tran, yeah. We hung out with her cousins, Artie and I can't remember all the cousins for so many.
Robert and Denise.
Yeah, Robert and Denise, absolutely. And we were at Robert and, you know, Robert, let's see. Denise was outside of, Robert was a Grubb, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was David Grubb and Trent Grubb, right. And then the daughter married I can't remember her name, went to the University of Michigan after he got out of the Navy. You know who I mean. But, Chris, right, exactly. Chris Clark.
But I want to focus on your relationship.
Well, so we went down there and did that, and we visited Uncle David on the way back in New York City. He was at NYU as an undergraduate student. And I asked if we could stay there, and I thought I'd play a trick him, and I said, you know, we secretly got married. And Uncle David really believed me. He really did. And he was really excited. And once we saw how excited he was, we didn't have the nerve to tell him we were playing a joke on him till later. So we kind of went along with it all, and you know, it was pretty hard because Uncle David, there's an emotional side of him, but it doesn't often show up, and it was showing up. So we didn't want to snuff it out, in other words, because he's a very calculating kind of person, reserved, calculating, analytical. And I don't remember when we finally broke it to him, but he was a little upset. But then we later announced we're going to get married, so it kind of smoothed things out. Maybe it was the trial balloon in a way, you know, kind of thing. And
was there a decision or discussion, or what led you guys to decide?
Well, I think we were young, and we're in the period of idealism and the anti-war movement, although it wasn't so much part of Wendy's world, the anti-war movement, and civil rights certainly wasn't a part of the Bernathen part. They weren't prejudiced, they just stuck to themselves. I mean, that's not exactly prejudice, but it's not very inclusive, let's put it that way.
So how did that relate to you guys deciding to get married?
Well, I just sort of literally felt, and I think your mother felt that way, I mean, but this have been my words, you know, I couldn't imagine anything more correct than this, and, you know, it seemed like a really obvious decision, you know. I pretty much made most of my decisions in my life that way. It's sort of an intuitive sense, you know.
So after you decided to get married, how long till you got married, and what was
well,
the early marriage?
you know, she started working on the wedding stuff, and that's what women did in that era. She went back to live. Her mom and dad lived. They had a New England territory for delivering services. And they lived in Milford, Connecticut, which is just southwest of New Haven by 15 minutes. And she moved back in with her parents, and I would go down and visit her on weekends. I'd actually hitchhike down there, and Wendy and I used to hitchhike by going to the Mass Pike entrance right at Mass Ave in Newbury Street. And we'd hitchhike down, and Wendy's parents hated that idea. They couldn't believe it. Why would you doing that? But that was the way it was done. Dozens of people would be standing there any time of the day, getting rides.
And how did you guys get along with each other's families?
Well, Wendy's parents are very loving people, and I felt very welcomed. I think Wendy's father bent over backwards to educate me into the church, knowing that I didn't have any background, and I don't know if he had any prior experience bringing people in with zero background, but I mean, he did a really good job. In fact, I always thought when we had doctrinal class that he was making the whole class dumb down to my level, and all the rest of these very learned new churchmen would be groveling at my level and being kind to probably me and, you know, whatever. But I mean, all religion is back to basics. If you don't understand the basics, you don't need more sophisticated layers of any organized thought. If you miss the basics, then you don't get the higher level. So, you know, he went through the most fundamental things, you know, step by step.
And then how about the wedding itself? What was that like to getting married in Bernathen at the cathedral?
Well, it was a big to-do, you know. There's like 500 people invited. There's 3 receptions. You know, it was so whirlwind that I wonder what your mother really, I asked her many times, what do you remember about it? And that she could barely remember a thing about it because it was just overwhelming, you know. It wasn't a royal wedding, but it had so much to do, you know. And so after the wedding, we went over to Trent and David's house, and we all just kind of collapsed, literally, really just collapsed, you know. It was so hard to actually hang out. We were hanging out by physically not being able to move, you know.
And did you guys do a honeymoon?
Yeah, we went up to New Hope the first night and had dinner, and again, we were so tired. It's like, what are we sitting here doing dinner? I mean, it was just like, you know, too tired to you when you're too tired, you can't appreciate anything. We're just so tired.
So after you got married, you guys moved back to Boston. What happened? What was life like then?
Yeah, well, I had an apartment on Symphony Road, 49 Symphony Road, and it was a former regular, real, authentic, probably 1950s or 60s poured concrete parking garage. So it was like, like a fortress. And they made it in multi-mountain apartments. And we had one studio apartment. And
what was your early married life like?
your mother, was pretty much indoctrinated by, the period. She was not working, and she cleaned house and made food, and I'd come home, and I was working for Gilbane Building Company, working on the John Hancock Tower. And I would ride my bike even in the wintertime, unless it was really snowing.
Were you still at school?
Yeah, I was still in school. I ended up going part-time, so it took much longer to do that. And sometimes I didn't go to school just because I needed a break between going working full-time and going to school. It was pretty tough, pretty tough.
So what point did I come into the picture, and was that a surprise? Or
well, we hadn't really planned on you, but well, you were born in February. I guess, let's see, you were born in 73, we were married in 71, so it was 2 years later, basically. Or a year and a half later. I don't know the exact math. I'd have to go back, count calendar months, do that kind of thing. It was really exciting, Still, you have that picture of me holding you, right? I think you're wearing the clown baby outfit.
You mean in the hospital?
No, at home on 49 Symphony Road. I don't have a shirt on because our apartment used to be sometimes really hot. And you're wearing a baby blue. It's like a Harlequin thing, one side of your jumpsuit, baby jumpsuit was white, and the other was baby blue. And I think it had these little balls on it for like a clown type thing. Tasteful, not.
So what was it like being young parents in Boston in the 70s?
Well, we took you to the movies because your mother was nursing you, and then you would never cry when you were being nursed. So we could go to the movies, And then they made the drinking age 18, and we would go because through Jay and Denise, one of their housemates named Ingrid was a Swedish woman who dated Bunny Smith, this black musician, drummer, and he was like 20, 30 years older than us. And he was the man, like at Cheers, the two guys at Cheers. He was the man at this bar in Cambridge. So the drinking age became 18, and this was an Irish bar, and they raised money for the IRA for guns and bombs and underground activities. They really raised serious money there. And Cambridge is very political. And we used to take you in there. I remember showing up, no matter how crowded the place was, because we were with Bunny, even though we were coming later, people knew that, and they got us a table out of nowhere, where it was standing room already open. We always had a table and chairs. I mean, how could that happen? But, we were connected. And I remember when the drinking age went to 18, of course, there'd be kids in there that weren't 18, because it just ratchets down. So there were these two girls in there who clearly, this is their first time illegally being in a bar, and your mother is nursing you right in the same table with them. And they must have died thinking about, oh my God, this is too grown up for us, I mean, that's crazy, right?
So how would you describe yourselves as parents, aside from taking you to bars?
Well, we were very attentive, and we had, the only trouble we had was dealing with your colic. Was hard on you. It's a digestive immaturity, apparently, and it's painful for the baby, and it's agonizing for the parents, and it lasts for hours at a stretch, 3, 4, 5 hours. So that was the only real challenge we had. I mean, once you outgrew it, things were real easy. I mean, you were the first grandchild. You had all the love of both grandparents. There's the picture of my parents and Wendy's parents, and you, and little Poppy's holding you, and all four of them are like so gleeful. It's like amazing, you know. I think that's the best picture of your grandparents, Toshi, that picture, because they were so damn happy. I mean, you could just see it on their face.
And how was your and mom's relationship as young parents and young newlyweds? And, you know?
Well, my mom wasn't that hard for me. I mean, it might have been harder for Wendy. I don't know. You know, I think later in life, you know, Wendy might not have appreciated some of Mom's gifts to us and the way she helped us and things.
No, I meant how was your relationship with you and Wendy, my mom? Like, what was your young relationship?
Oh. Well, it's pretty simple. I was in school and I worked, and we had some friends pretty much from school, and Wendy had just Barbara. You know, your mother wasn't much to meet people. And
Always an introvert.
yeah, and like I said to her, let's join the food co-op, and I loved it socially, and I just wouldn't go to the market at 3 in the morning. I'll do anything but that, because it's just way too early. I wasn't a morning person in those days like I am today. And there would be so much leftover that we pretty much hardly ordered anything. The leftovers could sustain us, and then it was politically correct, and it was socially really rewarding because we met all the neighbors who were kind of philosophically in the same cut. And then, you know, I was very close to a lot of the faculty at the museum school. Anna Tufts had really strong relationships, and they were very social, and there was a lot of parties and dinner parties and things.
So when did you move to Brookline, and how did that change your life?
Well, what happened is we were broken into, and you were a baby, and we went out to actually look at another place to get a bigger place. And that afternoon on a Sunday, we were broken into in the middle of the day. And the security was very strong in that building, but they blew through the door with probably with a car jack and a chunk of lumber, and it just exploded the door jamb apart. And that was repairable, and we put a police lock on it, which is pretty strong, but not against the car jack, hydraulic jack. And then our neighbor was stabbed at 8 in the morning, like 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, and that was the last straw. And there was an older woman who was the property manager on site, and we just said to her, hey, we got a baby, we can't do this. We had a lease. It was enforceable that we'd probably be liable for a couple months rent, 2 or 3 months, and she just, you know, went to the owner and said, hey, listen, you know, everybody else doesn't have kids, they have a brand new baby, just let these guys go. And then we moved to Brookline. We just found this apartment and a house, and, you know, we didn't look very hard, and the landlord was Odette, and I can't remember her name suddenly, but I can see her face.
But was it true that you guys were just going to move there for the summer and ended up staying for?
Well, I don't know if it was this summer, but we were going to move there for a while. You know, and my plans were we'd move to New York City at some point, all along, and you know. I think it was comfortable for us. It wasn't that much farther away from me going to work, going to school, and all that stuff. And it seemed to be safe. You know, it's a walking around community, not a driving one. I mean, we had a car, pretty much a brand new car. It wasn't brand new, but it was.
Saab?
Yeah, the Saab had when we bought it, had 8,000 miles on it.
The gray Saab,
yeah.
Red leather seats,
yeah.
Plastic seats.
Yeah.
I remember that car.
And it was kind of neat to be on a dirt road, tree line with 4 houses on it. I mean, it was very much a relief, or a way to get away from all the other concrete and all the houses. You know, you go, and as soon as you turn down that street, you're kind of in a different world. There were mud puddles there, big mud puddles, when there was rain, you know. And so it had a charm to it that everything else lacked, really. You know, and they were houses, you know. I mean, it was a relief. I mean, it really was, compared to everything else.
And I know a lot happened over the next 9 years after you moved to Auburn Place in Brookline, but it's just so that we get to Jasmin and Lily in the story. I just want to talk about, okay, you guys waited 9 years.
Well,
to have
well,
another kid,
here's-
and then you did have another kid. So
But this is important. I think it was more your mother's judgment. She thought that it took so much to raise one child. Not that you were demanding, that how grave the responsibility was. It would be a better way to express
well,
it.
you guys were very involved in my childhood.
Yeah, and I kind of basically agreed with her. It's an intuitive thing. It's not something you can measure, like how many hours or how intense it is on a scale of 1 to 10, and you can do a survey. It wasn't something like that. It was just seemed like it took a lot, you know. And then let's see.
So where were you in your life when you guys just, I don't know, did you decide to have Jasmine, or was it a surprise, or what was going on?
No.
Describe your life at that point, because that was 9 years later. You're in
Yeah,
school.
yeah.
I'm 8 or 9 years old.
I freelanced photography on my own and did the best I could. It was kind of feast or famine, and when I worked so much that I'd work 3-4 days back to back, like 18-hour days, and you could make a mistake. I mean, unloading sheet film in the dark at 2 in the morning, and then deciding to drive it over in the middle of the night because there was no traffic to Cambridge, Mass, to drop it in the mail slot, the drop-in slot, to get it processed, and marking every film box to be processed differently. You had to have your alertness on, because all your work could be vaporized in one mistake there. And then loading film again and marking these holders that look identical except for the numbers I wrote on them.
Sure. But,
you know.
So what was going on then?
Well, it was feast or famine, and I just sort of said, I can't do this. I can't really do it. So one of the jobs I ended up getting was for somebody at the daycare center, knew people at Kurzweil, and I ended up doing photography for them. And then in the process of doing photography for them, I met a lot of the people, and they liked me, and they offered me a job joining the sales. And then I worked for Larry Nelson.
What year is this?
Well, Jasmin was born in 81, right?
82, I think.
82. So it was probably like 79 or 78. So I worked there, and I became a superstar of sales. Literally in the first 6 months, I performed miracles. I sold tons of stuff, and I also averted a major lawsuit and got an order on top of it.
Sorry, we're at 10:30, so shoot.
Yeah. So, I think, we had a lot of commission checks coming in. I think that had a lot to do with, we sort of felt we had a more stable economic situation.
Right. You had moved from being like more a freelancer to having...
Yeah, exactly. Having a health plan and all that stuff, and knowing I really could do it really well on top of it. And then I actually outgrew that Xerox stuff and went to Rome, which was bought up by IBM. But Jasmin was born while I was there. That's the one I played the big joke on the entire company. I took a picture of you and this baby and Xeroxed you many times and cut and pasted you and made a birth announcement on April 1st. And nobody caught on that it was April 1st.
You made that you had quadruplets.
Yeah, and put them on everybody's desk early in the morning, which would be one of the few mornings I'd ever get to work before 9:30 or 10. And even Ray Kurzweil said, I better give that guy a raise. Ray actually said that. And then one of the other vice presidents was on the road, and his secretary, Connie, said, Joel Hoo just had quintuplets or something. And he said, that little guy? What does size have to do with it, right? Never.
So let's talk about, Jasmin, so you guys decided to plan to have another kid at that point because you were feeling more secure?
Yeah.
So tell me about what having Jasmin was like and how it was.
Well, by then, we'd had you in a hospital, and Lynn Ash, Lynn and Debbie, your peer, contemporary, they were having Rebecca before Jasmin, and that was a home birth, so that sent Wendy on the path of home births, and we used the same midwife and the same pediatrician, OB-GYN, not a pediatrician, but OB-GYN doctor, an older gentleman. And they come to your house. And so Jasmin was born at, both Jasmin and Lily were at 10 Auburn Place. And home births. And then I think it was in the summertime, we were up at, I remember somebody was visiting us and we decided to go out for a drink, which is pretty untypical of us. If we had any liquor or wine or beer, we'd just drink it at the house. But somebody said, let's go for a drink. We drove into Gloucester because that was a wet town, not a dry town. Your mom and I were coming back along Route 127. And she looked up at the moon and said, let's make a baby tonight. And that was the beginning of Lily. So
when Lily's born,
Lily was
born
on
in
his way.
84, right?
80,
I think 84.
I forget the exact years, but Jeff said, hey, why don't you take one of these extra beepers and pagers and wear it, because then when he could call you if anything happened. I go, oh, that's smart, you know. And I never thought of it, you know. And I just started enrollment, and I literally had to, I was supposed to be there for like 2 months and then go out for the training stuff, and I was only there for 3 days. So I had to learn 2 months worth of stuff, and Jeff's wife-to-be worked there, and she handheld kind of tutored me, you know, and all that stuff, and I went away for 3 weeks, I think. And fortunately, Lily didn't show up in that 3 weeks, because I would have been stuck in California, in Santa Clara, actually. Anyways, I started a career there and did, you know, like multiple times better than I did at Xerox for money. And literally, like, checks were coming in every 2 weeks, big checks, thousands of dollars. And then, you know, I got all the perks of being the #1 guy. Like 9 months out of every year, I was the #1 guy, and you get all these other perks. You know, my car was paid for, everything, all that other stuff.
Very cool.
Plus, then you don't have to be so accountable, because your bosses know that, don't worry, everything's being taken care of.
Right.
And so they don't look at all that little shit that other people have to deal with.
So, one of the things, we should probably wrap up to get to the airport, but one of the things we didn't get the chance to talk about this week, but we'll have to talk about it another time, is I want to ask you this question: what in your life are you most proud of?
I think it's a gift that I got, just being able to work with people, and having realized I had that gift, and being in the right places, circumstances to apply it. And in sales, that would be to get people to buy stuff from me, but actually I sold solutions, so I wasn't really giving them, you know, a selfish solution. It was a solution. It was a really complete, comprehensive answer to all their needs, because I could dig that deep with them. But later in life, just doing consulting work, people would always say, like, you ask the most amazing questions at the right time that make us rethink what we're doing. So to summarize that, I really thought about this a lot. I think I have the ability to help people see things through a new lens, to see into a different paradigm, because it's so easy to get trapped. And I am currently even trapped in a paradigm that I'm trying to make sure that I'm not a victim of as I start this new company. So it's hard to do on yourself. It might be easier to do on others. But I think that's something that's really been a gift, you know, for me. Because practically any of my clients kind of never forgot me. I mean, if I ever call them up, they're like, oh my God, I haven't heard from you. And, you know, they want to know everything about my life. And then they always say, like, is there anything I can do to help you? And that's very satisfying, you know. And I'm not looking for thanks. You know, I do things in the old neighborhood from all the neighbors. It's just mow everybody's lawn because they're college professors or they're old. And I don't want to hear them turn on a lawnmower, and I don't want to see them sweat and toil. You know, so I think that for me is not like it's a major accomplishment. It's just something that, you know, you wonder how you can help people. That's how I can help people. I mean, I can fix their toilet too, and I can help them do other things, but it's, I think, along those lines.
Okay, we should go in a couple minutes. Last question.
Yeah.
You know, part of why we're filming this is so that maybe, you know, Adrian and are pretty young now. They can't really take in too much. But let's say it's 20 years from now, 30 years from now, they have some kids of their own. Like, what would you want to tell them about advice for living a good life, or be, you know, or what would be your advice to their kids, to Adrian and Camille's kids?
I'm talking to whom now? To their kids?
Adrian or Camille's kids. So your great grandkids.
I'm talking to their kids.
Yeah. Because they'd say they probably won't get to meet you. They may not get to meet me.
Right. So as my great grandkids, Camille and Adrian's kids, I would say that the parenting you're receiving, which you cannot understand at all, has pluses and minuses from your perspective, things you like and things you don't like. But when you finally become young adults and maybe even parents, you'll realize that your parents did the best they could, and that they probably reacted to their parents and did what they thought their parents had not done so well, and did more of the stuff they thought their parents had done well. So you're the product of many generations of being raised in reality. So all sorts of things you will inherit environmentally through your parents that they've learned through their parents and their grandparents perhaps as well. And that's pretty damn intellectual, but where I think I'm talking to a 20-year-old or 25-year-old in the future.
And what would you want them to know about the Who family legacy? What anything you want them to carry down about family knowledge or family story or family themes or?
Well, I think a major thread that comes from me, I mean, I don't really know much about my grandfather in Shanghai. He worked hard. I know my mother's father worked hard as well. He never saw the fruits of his labor really become immense. And so little grandma and little poppy came from the opposite extremes. One was poor as a church mouse and the other one was filthy rich, literally. So why should they be able to be together? Because it wasn't their affluence that let them be partners. It was, you have to find people of common values. I mean, that's what I was struck with by meeting Wendy Sonneson, her values, and her beauty, and her good heart. And, you know.
Anything else you want to say?
Oh, no, that was kind of a touching moment for me to say that. I feel a little caught up.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing so much, Dad. Appreciate you coming all the way here and just bringing yourself and bringing your love and your creativity and your knowledge and your wisdom, and it's been really beautiful. I'm glad we got a chance to do the second interview.
Yeah, yeah, good.